I'm competing today with baby Jack over here. He brought his mother, Amanda Raposo, and I'll introduce her in a little bit, but she works at the Southcoast Diabetes Management Program, and she's worked with me for the last 4 or 5 years on this whole project, and very helpful. And once she's free of all her maternity duties, she'll be talking to us. Got another person coming in. So, well, welcome. How many of you have not been to one of these classes? I know you've been doing it on video. This is your first time? Second time?
This is first time.
First time. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else first time? Okay. Just very briefly, I want to make sure that everybody knows the same things. I'll just go over the fact that, first of all, I'm not a physician. I'm a psychologist. I'm not here to give you medical advice. If you're on medication in particular, you need to go and speak with your doctor about this. But one of the things you might need to do is to educate your doctor about low-carb diets, because many of them don't know a whole lot about them. So what we've talked about is the fact that we've been told for years that in order to lose weight, what we should do is cut fats out of our diet, okay? The problem is that doesn't work very well, and if we have to cut back on calories as part of that, we simply end up being hungry, and research has told us over and over again that when people are hungry, they eat. So you may lose weight for a while, but eventually you'll put the weight back on. What we're talking about a lot here is getting rid of low-fat products, okay? Things like yogurt with all that sugar in the bottom. Okay? It's not doing you any good, and even though there's reduced fat, you're getting a load of calories, and particularly from sugars, and it's those kinds of calories from carbohydrates that are more likely to convert to body fat, and that's how people end up going on low-fat diets and gaining weight. Okay, it happens a lot. So the reason we've been told that fat is bad for us is that it's supposedly related to heart disease, but over the last 10 years there's been a lot of research looking at what really causes heart disease, and it's not dietary fats. In fact, dietary fats can be protective of heart disease. What you need to do is reduce carbohydrates in the form of sugars and refined grains. Okay? So when you eat carbohydrates, it stimulates insulin, which is a hormone in your body, and that insulin creates a response to your body that increases storage of fats in your cells. So the more carbohydrates you eat, the more fat you store. That's why you see weight gain when people eat high carbohydrate diets, including the diet that was recommended to us by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, when in fact what we should be doing is cutting carbohydrates and not fats from our diet. Because of recent demand for some alternative to eggs for breakfast, we said that this week we would cover some cereal alternatives. But to do that, before we do that, what I want to do is just review some things about what we have been eating in this country. As you can see from the chart, the number one food that's consumed in America by far are flour and cereal products, okay? It's way up there in terms of our mean intake. Way at the bottom are fruits and vegetables, and then dairy, caloric sweeteners, meat, eggs, oils, and fats on the way up there. What that says is that we have a society that is largely consuming carbohydrates as the main part of their diet. And we wonder why we are all walking around with too much weight and why we're developing diabetes and prediabetes for over half of the people who live in this country. There's something wrong with that, okay? And what this course is all about is helping people to understand that it's that shift away from fats to carbohydrates that is responsible for most of the weight gain in this country and all the metabolic diseases related to that. So, since cereal is in 90% of American homes, we need to understand a little bit about it. You might think cereal was around at the time of the caveman, but in fact, we have not had cereal until about the last 150 years. In colonial times, you know, when people from Europe came to this country, obviously the people who were living here for 8,000 to 12,000 years, were they eating cereal? Were they eating bread? Were they eating grain? Well, only in the last 400 years, and that was a European import. Actually, some of that came from South America. But no, the native population, for the most part, did not eat corn. We think they did. That's all they ate. That is not true. Okay. Primarily, they ate game. Okay. They hunted and gathered and roots and tubers and things of that sort, berries, whatever they could find. But their primary source of calories was from meat. Okay? And if you go back in history, prior to the invention of agriculture, that was mankind's primary source of nutrient, was hunting. Okay? And with that, we did not see heart disease, diabetes, and any of the what we call diseases of civilization that we have today. Okay. Once you introduce grains, and first you have to hybridize them considerably, they don't come ready-made. The original cereals and things like that were little tiny plants that took years and years of hybridization to get to the place they are now. So they weren't seen as a very good source of calories at the time. It took centuries of settled communities before you began to develop the kinds of grains that we have today. But back in colonial times, you would eat one meal. When was that? What part of the day? Pardon me?
Breakfast.
Not breakfast. The middle meal, dinner, at noon. Why? What did it take to cook a meal? You had to get up, chop wood, build a fire, work with your food, etc., etc. You were lucky if you got it on the table by noon. Okay, that was your main meal of the day. Okay, so breakfast really just became whatever you could grab. Okay, any other meals were not proper meals, in that you didn't sit down and convene for your breakfast or your dinner. You just ate what was available, often what was left over from the day before, whatever you happened to have, okay? Might be bread, might be porridge, okay? Might be a piece of meat, things of that sort. Colonists, by the way, ate a lot of meat. I went to a colonial dinner once, and it was nearly all meat, hardly any vegetables. They didn't think about vegetables for the most part, okay? And they got most of the nutrients from meat. In the mid-1800s, there was a lot of religious fervor in this country. Okay, lots of people with all kinds of ideas about how we should live. Okay, and along with that came ideas about how we should eat. There's a close association between religion and food, if you think about it. Okay, the Israelites, for instance. I mean, half of Deuteronomy and Leviticus is full of prohibitions about food and what you should eat and how you should prepare it. Okay, so being religious meant eating a certain way. Well, some of those religious people began to talk about ways of curing people of their sin by eating. Okay, interesting idea. Okay, and one of them was Sylvester Graham, who was a preacher of health ideology, who advocated for a vegetarian diet and whole wheat as a panacea, not only for health problems, but for spiritual problems, okay? And he invented the graham cracker, okay? You all had a graham cracker, okay? They're still around, all right? Another person, James Caleb Jackson, was a devout vegetarian. He was the operator of the Jackson Sanatorium, okay? This is for healing people with tuberculosis and other infectious diseases. There were a lot of sanitaria around the country at the time, particularly in the Midwest, and often run by religious preachers, okay, and who had ideas about what people should eat, okay. And one of them was Jackson, who came up with granola, okay. We've seen granola around, and if you read, this is from the early package here. I'll read this. An invalid food prepared by a combination of grains so treated as to retain in the preparation of the highest degree of nutrient qualities while eliminating every element of an irritating character. This food preparation is adamantly adapted to the use of all persons with weak digestion, defective assimilation, general or nervous debility, brain workers, whoever that is, feeble children, and invalids generally, as well as travelers and excursionists who often need to carry the largest amount of nutrient in the smallest bulk, which is afforded by granola in a preeminent degree. 1 pound more than equals 3 pounds of the best beef. Why does he say that? Well, most people were eating meat, okay? He wanted to say, you can eat this instead of meat, okay? So granola was one of the earliest products, and we still see it around today, right? Others, the Kellogg brothers in particular, you've all heard of Kellogg's, okay? Came up with a way, come on in, of milling corn, okay? We're growing a lot of corn, but it's difficult to, if you just don't nibble on a handful of dried corn kernels, you're going to be chewing for a long time, okay? It doesn't work. But by milling and toasting the corn into flakes, he came up with corn flakes, okay? Also along the line was William Post, who invented Postum. Anybody ever drink Postum? Okay, it's a coffee substitute. Coffee was not supposed to be good for you. So you drink this grain product. Looked like coffee, doesn't taste like coffee, let me tell you. Okay. And then further on, grape nuts. Anybody ever had grape nuts? I used to eat these when I was in high school all the time. Okay, that's in particularly good for mental dullness. Okay, that's what got me through high school. Okay.
And I just have to throw out something about grape nuts. Everybody thinks because they're so like dense and you have to like chew them and all that kind of stuff, they think that it's a whole grain, lots of fiber. It is so processed, there's hardly any fiber left in it. So
Right.
it's actually a really terrible option.
It's just straight carb.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But not going to do you much good. And then Post came up with his own version of cornflakes with Post Toasties. Okay. Anybody hear of these products?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This takes you back, doesn't it? Oats was another grain that was marketed for consumption by humans. I mean, up until the mid-19th century, people fed oats to animals. Okay, great for horses. They love oats. Okay, they had the kind of teeth that could chew them. All right, and they have the kind of gut. Remember, we're not an herbivore primarily, nor are we. We don't have a 4-chambered stomach like cows, so we're not very good at processing grasses. In fact, they're somewhat noxious or poisonous to us in a lot of ways, so unless they're heavily processed, we have a hard time digesting them. Well, oats were consumed often in the form of porridge for many years. Just put some oats and cook them to death in water, and they'll soften up enough so you can eat them. But with the introduction of the potato in the late 16th century, we didn't have potatoes all forever. They're actually an import. We didn't get potatoes until the natives in South America gave them to the explorers who took them back to Europe. Okay, so that wasn't an original food in Europe. So people were eating potatoes and not eating as many oats. So Quaker Oats came out with the first prepared cereal, if you will. Okay, the idea of having the Quaker to promote the purity of this food. Okay, that it was good for you. You had to convince people. They started out with regular Quaker oats, and then, of course, in the 50s came out with fast Quaker oats, because if you're going to cook oatmeal, how long does it take you? Good 20 minutes or so? Who's got 20 minutes anymore in the morning, okay? So we processed the oats even more, to the point that they're almost like sugar now, okay? And those little packets that you use, terrible, absolutely horrible. Oats, like many grains, go rancid quickly because they have fat in them, okay? And fat, if you leave fat out for weeks, it's oxidizing, it's gonna go rancid. The fats are relatively healthy for you, with a good breakdown of saturated, monosaturated, polyunsaturated fats. And they also contain fiber, and we're going to talk a lot about fiber today. So a lot of people who like cereal and want to do something for the health often end up eating oats. What's the problem with oats when you're on a low-carb diet? Are oats low carb?
Oh, no.
No, they're high carb. Okay, that's what you get is carbohydrates. Granted, you get some fats in them, which is helpful, and granted, if you get steel-cut oats, it will digest more slowly, so you don't get blood sugar spikes. But if you're trying to cut your carbs, you've really got to find an alternative to oatmeal, and that's what we'll talk about a little later today.
And I'll just throw out
Yep.
the fact that, so, I don't know, we really said this, but I'm a dietitian, and I work with the diabetes management program out of Southcoast hospitals, and apple and cinnamon, and so one packet is 29 or 30 grams of carbs. Nobody has one packet, right? Everybody has at least two, and then even if it's the plain oatmeal, you add in brown sugar or you put fruit on top, and those carbs add up, add up, add up. So, 2 packets is actually 60 grams of carbs, and then you throw some other stuff on there, you could be going upwards of, 75 to 100 grams of carbs for breakfast, especially if you're having a glass of juice on the side. It all adds up, and that's where we're living in a really high carb world. So when people ask me what my favorite cereal is, I say eggs. But I just want to throw that out there, especially with the really processed packets. It's crazy how our carb consumption can skyrocket.
So Quaker Oats came up with the technology to do puffed cereals, so we ended up with puffed rice and puffed wheat and all that. Cheerios, which is also a puffed oat cereal. Sugar Smacks, Rice Krispies, all of that kind of stuff, okay? And what you need to think about is how processed these foods are. You start with a grain which has some nutrient benefits, but then by the time it's milled and milled and milled and milled, it ends up being very close to just sugar, okay? Because it gets absorbed so quickly by our bodies. Right?
And if you look at the ingredient list at the bottom, underneath the nutrition facts, you'll find that they have a whole bunch of vitamins listed at the very end because they're adding the vitamins back in because they took everything out. So that is a definition of processed, So instead of having something that automatically already has the nutrients in there, we're refortifying or enriching by adding these things back in. And they're not going to be as good as the whole food was in the first place.
So the one argument that people often put up for people on low-carb diets is you're not getting enough fiber. And you can easily point out that it's easy to get fiber in cereals. That you've all heard about brand cereals and things of that sort. And they have high fiber content, no question about it. The problem is, along with the fiber, what else are you getting? Carbs. Okay? So the question is, how do you eat a low-carb diet that still has adequate fiber? Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about fiber in a minute here. So fiber is a type of carbohydrate. Okay? It happens to be the part of carbohydrates that's indigestible. Okay? But it is a carb. One way to think about it is a carbohydrate, because it has carbon in it, carbo, okay, will combine with oxygen, okay, and when you put carbon and oxygen together, what do you end up with? CO2, carbon dioxide, which is the product of a chemical process that creates heat. In other words, carbohydrates burn, okay? Take your average piece of toast, okay? It burns, right? It turns to carbon, okay? You can light a piece of toast on fire if you work at it, okay? So the whole point about carbohydrates is that they do contain fibrous material that is indigestible, but is still a carbohydrate. It will still burn in that sense, but your body doesn't burn.
Another thing about
Yeah.
CO2 is, you know, as you said, the byproduct of carbs when you digest them is carbon dioxide and water. And the more carbs that you eat, the harder you breathe actually, because you're trying to get rid of that carbon dioxide out of your body, so you're trying to exhale it. So people who have breathing problems, whether it's asthma or it's COPD or anything like that, they benefit greatly from a low-carb diet, independent of weight or anything else, just because if you can decrease the amount that your body has to work to get rid of that CO2, you're better off. And proteins and fats actually have a lower respiratory quotient, so they don't have as much of an impact on your breathing as carbs do. And I've noticed that myself. I don't have a breathing problem, but if I overdo it on carbs, I can feel it in my breathing.
So we do need fiber, 20 to 30 grams a day, but there are many sources, including whole fruits and vegetables, and we'll talk about that. What happens to fiber in our gut? You know, you eat something, it doesn't just evaporate, it stays there for a while, okay? And you might think, well, why do we want all that sludgy fiber sitting in our gut? Well, there actually are some good reasons for all of that. It helps maintain our health overall and maintain a balance of microflora. This may come as a surprise to some of you, but you have more cells, bacterial cells in your body than you have cells in the rest of your body. We're a bag of bacteria, basically, if you think about it, okay? Something, right, you may find a little disgusting, but in fact, you don't have to think about it, and if those bacteria weren't there, you would not be a healthy person. In fact, if certain of those bacteria are not there, you can become quite sick, okay? So you need a good place for your bacteria to grow and thrive, and that's what fiber helps to provide. Think of it as the soil in the garden, okay? As we age, the microflora, the bacteria, decreases. So the older you are, the more fibrous material you need. If you're taking an antibiotic, okay, they're designed to kill bacteria. Okay, that's what they do. And I don't know if any of you have taken antibiotics, but you'll notice a change in your stools. Okay, that's because it's killing the bacteria that should be there. And what you have to do is replenish and replace that, okay, after time. Healthy bacteria help digestion by breaking down lactose, which is milk sugar, proteins and fibers, and they inhibit the development of pathogens and other things that cause infections. So we need them. Prebiotics are those elements in our diet that act as that fertilizer. Okay, it's just another name for fiber, if you will. The healthy benefits include increased bone density, a strengthened immune system, and better controlled weight and appetite. Okay? So recent studies have also found that taking prebiotics, those people taking them are also mentally healthier, less depression. Okay? There are two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Soluble just means that it will join with water into a suspension, and it kind of looks like porridge, if you will. Okay? Whereas insoluble fiber does not combine with water, but helps move your fiber through your system. So insoluble fibers can include wheat and whole wheat, bread and grains and couscous and all those things that we're trying to avoid eating, but also legumes or beans, if you will, carrots, cucumbers, and tomatoes. So there are other sources of fiber, okay? And you don't have to get all your fiber from grains. There are 3 classifications of fiber: dietary, functional, and also viscous and non-viscous. And this is probably getting into way too much detail. And if you can read any of those names up there, they have names for all the different kinds of fiber, okay? It's very complicated, but this is a whole new field now of looking at our microflora. Soluble fiber becomes fermented in the colon and creates internal gas, okay? So if you have beans, you're going to know it, okay? But you can take something called Beano before you eat them, and it helps. But there are benefits including that fermentation, including the balancing of intestinal pH, your acid-base balance, and regularity, and control of LDL cholesterol. So the good things about soluble fibers, okay? Look at all the sources of soluble fiber. This is not all about carbs. Do artichokes have a lot of carbohydrates in them? No, they're relatively low. Raspberries and blackberries, we talked about last week, okay? Low in sugar, but loaded with fiber. Lettuce, leafy greens, broccoli, okra, cauliflower. As we've talked about, the potato of the low-carb group, okay? Asparagus, cabbage, great food, very low in carbohydrates, but produces lots of fiber. Nuts, we talked about how good nuts are, and fruits like strawberries. So somebody who says you're not going to get enough fiber on a low-carb diet doesn't know all the sources of fiber that you can get without increasing the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating. One fiber that I brought some samples of, and once I'm done yapping, we'll have a chance to sample that, is something called flaxseed. We've talked about that because flaxseed is very high in a type of fat called omega-3. It's very good for us. Same kind of fat that you get in fatty fish, which is also good for you and actually benefits your heart. You know, we keep hearing fat's bad for your heart. No, right fats are good for your heart, and this is one of them. So it has a lot of fiber as well. And I brought chia seeds. I'll pass these around. Anybody ever seen these? Every Christmas time they advertise a little product for a Christmas gift. Chia plants, okay, where they grow and sprout. Well, these are made so that they don't sprout, number one. They're full of fiber, but they have, you ready for this? Do you want to guess how many carbohydrates? 5 carbs, that's for a tablespoon. Guess how much fiber in that same tablespoon?
The same 5?
5. So you subtract the fiber from the carbs, 0.
What do you do with that, though? Is that
You can put them in cereals, and salads, and meats. You can use it as a thickener for soups. There are all kinds of things. So I'll pass that around. There are even some recipes on the back of the
Where did you
package
get
there.
that from around here?
I bought that at TJ Maxx.
Really?
Yeah.
Did it? Oh my God.
They have the best prices. Pardon me?
John has a lot of stuff.
Yep.
They also have the ground fiber.
Yep, you can get them ground as well, but you want the whole seed in there.
Yeah, I wanted to throw out 2 things. One about the flaxseed. I noticed that you have ground flaxseed over there. I do recommend buying whole flaxseed and then grinding it as you need it, because the omega-3s that he was talking about are very sensitive to heat and light, and they can go rancid very quickly. So if you buy it ground, you don't know how long it's been on the shelf and how long it took to transport there. So you're better off buying the whole flaxseed and then grinding it as you go. The flaxseed is not going to be digestible unless you grind it. Otherwise, it'll just go straight through you and you didn't get anything because your body can't break down that outer layer. Chia seeds do not need to be ground. They can be eaten as is. Again, I would recommend buying them whole. But if you soak them, they will double, triple, I forget how much they grow, but they do grow and form like this gelatinous outer core kind of thing. And so that's where he said that they can thicken stews and stuff like that. Some people, I'm not sure if there's any recipes in the back, but there are some cereal, low carb cereal recipes that use chia seeds almost as like an oatmeal type thing mixed in with other ingredients because they thicken like oatmeal does.
And we have some chia seeds in the back that you can try.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about it as a replacement for flour in some recipes.
Yep.
Because it acts in that way. Coconut, we've talked a lot about coconut oil, but the whole coconut, there's a lot of fiber in it, it's low in carbs, and here's, you interested in trying some of this?
All the time. Yeah?
Coconut? I'll pass the package around, but we can open it up and you can help
Yeah,
yourself.
I've been cooking.
Collard greens, we talked two times ago, we talked a lot about avocados, okay? Not only are they full of good beneficial fats, but they're also high in fiber as well.
Can I throw something out about
Yep.
coconut? Coconut has been like this new thing, like whole grains was the new thing for a while. Coconut is like the new health food. And so whole coconut like you find in that package, unsweetened coconut flakes or like unsweetened shredded coconut, those are all great things. Coconut milk, canned unsweetened coconut milk, those all fit into a low carb lifestyle. Coconut sugar is sugar, okay? So there's no difference. It's still going to give you a lot of easily digestible carbs. And coconut water is surprisingly higher in carbohydrates than coconut milk. And with coconut milk, there are sweetened and unsweetened varieties. So you want to go for the unsweetened variety, and you'll get 2 grams of carbs per cup, compared to regular milk has 12 grams of carbs per cup. So it is a low carb alternative. But, coconut has become this buzzword, but not everything coconut is always low carb. If you're in the bakery aisle of your grocery store, most likely the coconut flakes are sweet. So you're going to get sugar along with it. But just like the chia seeds and, Dave has a lot of Bob's Red Mill stuff available. Job Lot or TJ Maxx, that's a cheaper place to get the Bob's Red Mill line or other low carb products instead of the grocery store because they get higher in price.
Or Whole Foods.
Yeah, you don't need to go to Whole Foods to get low carb
Right.
good stuff.
So in addition to coconut, look at all the vegetables again, broccoli, cauliflower, turnip greens. We just talked about flax seeds, almonds, okay? You're looking for something to snack on, lots of fiber as well as good fats in them, hazelnuts and filberts as well. So there are a number of sources of fibers through nuts.
And macadamia nuts are the highest amount of fat that you can get along with your carbs.
Right. Even though they're a bit expensive.
What's that?
I say they're also a little more expensive than other nuts.
Sorry. Again, Job Lot has had them.
Again, more vegetables there. All of these, you look at the fiber contents to the right. And we're going to talk just a little bit about something called potato starch. Okay. The problem with potatoes and a low-carb diet is what's in potatoes?
Carbs.
Carbs, lots of carbs, okay? That's what gives you that good full feeling, when you eat too many of them, and then you wonder why. And used to be, if, in the 1850s, if you wanted to lose weight, what would they recommend you stop eating? 2 things. Potatoes and bread, right? And maybe beer. Okay. So, potatoes and bread, though, are this huge source of carbohydrates in people's diets. And that's why when people simply cut out potatoes and bread, okay, they'll lose 20 pounds. I mean, it just works that way. What we're talking about is not just taking the carbs out, but also adding fats into your diet. You've got to do both. You can't just cut the carbs. You'll be hungry, okay? What you need to do is use fats then that your body needs and wants and will not put on the weight, but will give you the calories that you need for energy. Potato starch is an interesting product in that it's made in such a way that it doesn't digest in the upper part of your gut, okay? Potato starch digests in your colon, okay, and actually produces a fat in your colon, which is very interesting. Potato starch improves insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance, that is, how well your body handles sugars. Produces more satiety, you feel fuller, longer, and is associated with lower cholesterol and triglycerides. Triglycerides are a type of fat that circulates in your blood and promotes good bacteria and suppresses bad bacteria. You can't go wrong with this stuff. How do you use it? Well, it's kind of interesting. You eat it, but like I said before, it doesn't digest right away, goes to your colon, and then some bacteria work on it and produce butyrate. Okay, see that molecule up on the top? It says number 2, butyrate is produced. And butyrate is the fat that I was talking to you about. And it does all kinds of good things for you, even though most of it isn't really digested in the usual way. So if you're interested, you sprinkle a little on your food, you don't taste it, and you can go up to about 4 teaspoons a day, and you might find that you're losing weight more because of that. It doesn't affect you any other way. Interesting product of potatoes, and you can get that at Job Lab as well. It's an example of what's called a resistant starch. It resists digestion, but it's a starch, okay? So it doesn't add carbohydrates to your diet. It stays in your, goes through your stomach and small intestine undigested, eventually reaching the colon where it feeds friendly bacteria. And those have a positive effect on the type and number of bacteria. They form gases and short-chain fatty acids, most notably what I was talking about, butyrate, the preferred fuel of the cells that line the colon.
With the fruit shakes.
So what do you think?
Your grandson?
Could you stand eating that every morning?
A nice alternative.
So everybody got a chance to sample some cereal, some almond milk, some milk. Anybody go for the light cream? Boy. Yeah.
I use the soybean.
You can use soy. Yep. So, stay as long as you want to enjoy what you're eating.
Yeah, this is the one before.